400 people, 2 hours. Somewhere between 150 and 300 of them didn't survive it. And to this day, no one agrees on who fired the first shot. How did a spiritual movement about hope turned into the last major bloodshed of the American Indian Wars? And why does that distinction still matters today? This isn't a story about savagery on one side and innocence on the other. It's messier than that. This is a story about fear, grief, and a dance that was never supposed to end in gunfire. If you're new here, this channel goes looking for the human stakes behind history like this every week. So hit subscribe if that's your kind of story. Let's get into it. It's December 1890. The place is Wounded Knee Creek, South Dakota, on the Pine Ridge Reservation. The people are Lakota Sioux, and specifically a band led by a chief named Spotted Elk, sometimes recorded as Bigfoot the US. Government had spent decades pushing native nations onto smaller and smaller pieces of land, breaking treaties almost as fast as it signed them. By 1890, the Lakota had lost the Black Hills, lost the buffalo that sustained their way of life, and were living on government rations that often didn't arrive. This story matters because what happened at Wounded Knee didn't just end a conflict. It symbolically closed an entire chapter of American history, one the government itself declared finished. To understand why hundreds of Lakota were marching through freezing plains in December, you need to understand a dance. It was called the Ghost Dance, and it started with a Paiute prophet named Wovoka, far away in Nevada. Wovoka said he'd had a vision. If native peoples danced this dance and lived righteously, the world would be renewed. The buffalo would return, ancestors would come back, and in some versions passed through the oral tradition, settlers would vanish from the land. That last part is key because it's what terrified white settlers and federal agents. The ghost dance itself was peaceful, but agents on Pine Ridge saw hundreds of Lakota dancing for days at a time, working themselves into trance states, and they panicked. They sent word to Washington, "This looks like the start of an uprising." Now, here's the first hook. The US government's response wasn't just to send troops, it was to try to arrest the most famous Lakota leader alive, Sitting Bull. He hadn't started the ghost dance movement, he was skeptical of parts of it, but he was seen as a symbol of resistance. So on the 15th of December 1890, Indian police went to arrest him at his home on Standing Rock Reservation. A struggle broke out. Sitting Bull was shot and killed by his own people, Lakota police officers working for the US government. The man who had defeated Custer 14 years earlier died in a scuffle at his own doorway. That single event changed everything. Fear spread fast through Lakota communities. Spotted Elk's band camped nearby. They worried they'd be next. So they did something that seemed reasonable at the time. They ran. Not to fight, but to seek safety. Spotted Elk led roughly 350 of his people south toward Pine Ridge, hoping other Lakota leaders there could protect them, or at least that being among more people meant more safety. It didn't work that way. The US Army intercepted them on December 28th. Spotted Elk was gravely ill with pneumonia at the time, reportedly riding in a wagon, coughing blood. His band surrendered without resistance. They were escorted to a camp beside Wounded Knee Creek and told to make camp for the night. Nobody in that group believed they were walking into a massacre. They believed they were being taken somewhere safer. Overnight, the US 7th Cavalry surrounded the camp. 4 Hotchkiss guns and early rapid-fire artillery were positioned on the ridge above, aimed directly down into the tippies. Remember the name we mentioned earlier? The 7th Cavalry? This was Custer's old regiment. Many soldiers in it still carried the memory and the grudge of Little Bighorn 14 years before. That context doesn't excuse what happened next, but historians agree it shaped the tension in the air that morning. On the morning of December 29th, soldiers began disarming the Lakota men, going tent to tent, collecting rifles, knives, even axes. During this search, a struggle broke out over a weapon owned by a man named Black Coyote, who was deaf and, according to some accounts, didn't understand the order to surrender his gun. That was when a shot rang out. To this day, no one knows for certain who fired first. That's the unanswered question at the center of this whole tragedy. What is certain is what happened in the next few minutes. The soldiers opened fire, not just with rifles, but with those Hotchkiss guns on the ridge, firing nearly a shell a second into a camp full of families. This wasn't a battle in any real sense. It was a slaughter with almost no cover. Men, women, and children tried to run. Some fled up a nearby ravine. Soldiers pursued them for miles, shooting as they went. When it was over, estimates range from 150 to 300 Lakota dead. The range itself tells you how chaotic and undocumented the killing was. 25 soldiers died too, several reportedly from friendly fire in the crossfire and confusion. Here's a detail that still unsettles historians. A blizzard hit the area right after the massacre. Army burial parties didn't return for 3 days. When they did, they found bodies frozen into the positions they died in. They dug a mass grave and buried at least 146 Lakota in it. Men, women, and children together, without individual services, without much ceremony at all. And here's the twist that history rarely mentions. 20 soldiers received the Medal of Honor for their actions that day. That medal has never been revoked, despite decades of formal requests from Native advocacy groups and even some members of Congress. It remains one of the most contested Medal of Honor decisions in American history. The US government would later call Wounded Knee the final military engagement of the so-called Indian Wars. That framing was deliberate. It let the country tell itself a clean story. The wars were over, the frontier was closed, history could move on. But for the Lakota, nothing about it felt like closure. It felt like an atrocity dressed up as a battle. So let's return to where we started. 400 people, 2 hours, and a question that's never been settled. Who fired first? The honest answer is, we don't know, and we may never know. What we do know is that it doesn't change the outcome. A sick chief surrendering under a flag of peace. A disarming that turned into a massacre. A grave dug in the snow. The Lakota Sioux are still here. The Pine Ridge and Standing Rock reservations exist today, home to thriving communities working to preserve language, ceremony, and sovereignty, including, in recent decades, renewed efforts to formally rescind those medals of honor. Wounded Knee isn't just a closing chapter. For the Lakota, it's a wound that's still part of an ongoing story. And speaking of ongoing stories, 80 years later, a very different group of Lakota activists would return to this exact same creek and occupy it for 71 days, demanding the world finally listen. That's a story for another time. If that's a story you want us to tell, let us know in the comments and subscribe so you don't miss it when we do.